We're coming on the air with a COVID question mark, that new variant, Omicron, and a very clear message. Don't freak out yet. It's spreading, yeah, but we still don't know how infectious it is or how sick it can make you or even how well vaccines protect against it. But we'll see if Moderna's top doctor can help us get an answer on that last question when we go one-on-one next. And one of the reasons we even know about this variant at all is because of a so-called virus hunter down in South Africa, part of a team who discovered it. So how do you hunt a virus? Richard Engel's live with that story. Plus, Jeffrey Epstein's former partner on trial starting today. Maybe the last chance for Epstein's victims to see someone behind bars for years of his sexual abuse. Our reporter in court will pop out to tell us what he's seeing in the defense and prosecution's strategy. And Twitter isn't real life, except if you're Jack Dorsey and you built it and now you're walking away from it. A move so big it actually shut down trading today. Still no word if we're going to get an edit button, but we'll talk about what else it means for those who tweet and even those who don't. And Novak Djokovic, one of tennis's biggest stars and biggest lightning rods, right? Now, even his dad is getting in on it, accusing a top tournament of blackmailing his son into getting vaccinated. Why Djokovic still won't say if he is or not later in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and you probably have a lot of questions about this new COVID Omicron variant. And listen, we have those same questions. And to be transparent, we don't have a ton of answers right now. So we want to be really clear in laying out what we do know and what we don't. So here's what we do know. Omicron is already spreading around the world. You're going to see a map showing you where. Southern Africa, several places in Europe, Hong Kong, etc. We know Omicron has a couple dozen mutations, which experts, some of them, are a little concerned about. But here's what we don't know. Is Omicron more transmissible? Do vaccines protect against it? Does it make people sicker than the typical COVID variant? One South African doctor says at this point it doesn't seem to, but Dr. Anthony Fauci says we probably won't see the data to back that up. We won't know the answers to a lot of these questions for probably another couple weeks. And the president, he's trying to walk this line, right? Make sure people understand this could be serious without totally freaking them out. Here's how he framed it.
This variant is a cause for concern, not a cause for panic. And we'll fight this variant with scientific and knowledgeable actions and speed, not chaos and confusion.
So today, the U.S. is starting a travel ban targeting these 8 Southern African countries. And by the way, that ban doesn't apply to American citizens who want to travel, just foreigners. And the president's also saying at this moment, big-time lockdowns seem to be off the table. Our Gabe Gutierrez is joining us now for more on the response here at home. Gabe, we're glad to have you with us. And listen, the overwhelming messaging seems to be, hey, this isn't March 2020. We're not where we were a year and a half ago, but this is still another good reason to get vaccinated. I know you've been reporting on this a ton. Is that a fair summary of where we are?
Yeah, Hallie, it definitely is. And as you were mentioning, the president today basically saying that widespread lockdowns were not going to happen, at least at this point. But Hallie, just within the past few minutes, we got word from the CDC that it's strengthening its recommendation for booster shots. Now basically no longer saying that people 18 and older could get a booster shot if they wanted to, now saying that they should. And basically what that means is that the federal government, the Biden administration, the CDC is really trying to get that message across that no matter what happens, no matter what extra information we get in the coming weeks, getting a vaccine and getting a booster shot will likely put you in a good position to fight off this variant, whatever comes of it, Hallie.
Gabe, that is so important. And you're right. That is happening literally as we were coming on the air. We heard from Dr. Walensky saying, go get a booster shot if you're over 18. And what's interesting here, Gabe, we had talked, I think it was last week or maybe the week before, about that very important difference between can get a booster shot and should get a booster shot. And now the government is leaning on the side of go out and do it now. You don't need any preconditions.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, the Biden administration, he was huddling, over the weekend with his public health advisors, and that is the messaging that they're sticking with. But Hallie, look, you mentioned those countries that are getting, instituting these travel restrictions, including the U.S., which, again, that went into effect today with that travel from those 8 Southern African countries. And there's another country that you mentioned where this has already spread, and that is Canada. And Canada, the New York's governor today, pointing out, obviously, Canada right next door. She even said that she could see Canada from her house, channeling Sarah Palin, perhaps. But she was making the point that this will likely be in the U.S. very, very soon, if it isn't already. It's likely already here. We just haven't reported it. So today, New York City actually reinstituted its indoor mask advisory, being very careful, of course, not to call it a mandate because of, well, you know where we are with that. But now, New York City reinstituting its advisory for indoor mask use.
Well, this is exactly what the other question I had for you was, Gabe, which is based on your reporting, what state governments, local governments might be doing now that we're hearing more and more about Omicron. Given the, listen, again, knowing we still have questions about it, you talked about what you're seeing in New York with that mask advisory. I spoke with one doctor who said she thought that was actually prudent, right? Almost like a better safe than sorry kind of thing.
Yeah, and look, a lot of it is going to have to come down to we just don't know, and you talked about this in the open, right? We're really going to have to wait for extra information to come out over the next 2 weeks. And as you said, the vaccine manufacturers, and I know you're about to speak with a guest in just a short time, you know, they're really taking a close look at this, and they are going to be looking at this latest data that they expect to have in just a few weeks to try and decide whether to tweak their vaccines, their boosters. But at this point, there are so many unanswered questions in terms of not just, you know, how resistant this variant is to these vaccines, how deadly it is. We're hearing from doctors in South Africa, you know, basically that they say that, yes, while there does seem to be quite a lot of spread of this variant, the symptoms that they're seeing right now are quite mild. So again, we're just going to have to see how this plays out. But yeah, and you know, local authorities in different parts of the country are going to have to be re-evaluating how they will deal with this, especially heading into the holidays. As you know, Hallie, COVID cases had already been rising before we even got news of this variant.
Probably in the winter surge soon, aside from this. Gabe Gutierrez, it is so great to see you, Gabe. Thank you very much. One of the things Gabe talked about was this idea of restricting travel, right? It's not just the U.S. doing that. Some countries, Japan, Israel, Morocco, they're shutting down travel for basically everybody. Others, the list on the right side of your screen, the UK, Russia, Australia, etc., they're just shutting out those countries in southern Africa. But there's a tension point here, right? Because the World Health Organization doesn't want to see these kinds of travel restrictions. They actually say those countries sounding the alarm on variants should be thanked and not punished with travel restrictions for bringing this to the world's attention. Richard Engel is here now with more on the overseas reaction. Richard, we're glad to have you on because I know that you've been digging into how this variant was even discovered in the first place, right? And that is through essentially a virus hunter that you talked to from South Africa.
Well, Hallie, it's good to talk to you. South Africa is very good at finding viruses, and it's no coincidence that the same countries keep finding these variants. South Africa has found several, India has found several, the UK has found several, because they have the laboratories to do it, and they're looking. You're not finding variants in countries that don't have the facilities to go out and break down these compounds and do the genetic sequencing. And one of the reasons that South Africa is so good at genetics and so good at identifying viruses is because it was hit so badly by HIV and AIDS. So for the last several decades, you have a generation of South African scientists and geneticists who had a lot of research and had a massive national crisis. South Africa was hit very badly by HIV and AIDS and is still dealing with that pandemic. But there is one particular doctor, and we've been in touch with him throughout the course of this current pandemic, and he was one of the first people to discover the Beta variant, which was initially called the South African variant, almost exactly a year ago. And I spoke to him earlier today, and we were reminiscing. I said, it was just a year ago that I was talking to you about Beta. What about this new one? What about Omicron? What makes you so concerned about it? He's also one of the first scientists to look at its genetic makeup. And what he's mostly concerned about is the number of mutations. And vaccines and viruses work like lock and keys. So if one of those elements, either the lock or the key, changes dramatically, it doesn't fit anymore. And what he was seeing, and again, it is anecdotal, we're not seeing a lot of data yet because it's still very new, is that in certain areas in South Africa, one district around Johannesburg, there's a lot of people who are getting cases where you wouldn't expect them to be cases. They thought there was a lot of protection because people either had already had COVID and had built up some antibodies, or because they had been vaccinated. And in this area around Johannesburg, they had initially had 100 cases just 3 weeks ago. Now they have 3,000. And that's what caused them to be so concerned, that in an area where they should have had protection, people are getting infected. And so far, it's been young people getting infected,
right.
And so far, people haven't been getting very sick. But he doesn't know if that's just the way that this infection happened to spread this time, that it was young people who happened to get it, and they're not sick yet, but they could be spreading it to other people. So he was quite concerned. He thinks it is a reason for concern and something that needs to be studied more because of this apparent ability to infect people who should already have a degree of protection.
It's such a good explanation of what this is and sort of how doctors, especially in South Africa, are looking at this. And then there's this tension point, Richard, that we talked about a moment ago, right? Of these travel restrictions going in place against a country like South Africa that's essentially saying, well, wait a second. We found this. We are transparent to bring this to the world's attention.
Yeah, don't shoot the messenger.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, yeah. So far, it has been in 22 countries that Omicron has been either identified or suspected, and they are around the world. And those are just the countries that have come forward and made this announcement. There are many countries that either A, don't have the scientific prowess to look, or potentially don't have the political will to make an announcement like this. So 22 countries that have come out and said suspected or confirmed, not all of them in Southern Africa. And today the South African president was saying, why are you shutting off this entire region? They were flights that were diverted, not diverted, but they were, people's travel was stopped. They were on flights from South Africa, and as soon as they land, the planes were met by authorities, and all the passengers were taken off and sent into quarantine. Some of the passengers tried to escape. So South Africa, and anyone traveling through South Africa, generally has been massively disrupted, and this sort of tip of Africa has become a bit of a no-go zone. And this same virologist said, in his opinion, that he understands why people want to try to contain the virus, but he said that if you've looked at these variants in the past, at Beta or Delta or any of the others, that they generally aren't that helpful, that by the time you've even detected them, even at this early stages, they've already moved on and are already in multiple places around the globe. So it could be something that makes politicians feel better, punishes governments for coming forward, and might not have a tremendous impact. But what he does think is going to have an impact is more study, try and figure out exactly how serious it is, exactly how different the lock and key mechanism is with this particular variant. He said good news is PCR tests work. The virus has not mutated so much that it can't be detected. It's not invisible. They're still looking at the rapid antigen tests, the ones you get cheaply or for free at the pharmacy. Yeah. They think those still work, and they should still work, but they're still checking on that. But enough reason that he's concerned and is one of the first who was sounding the alarm. Richard Engel, we're so glad to have you with us. Thank you very much for your great reporting. We'll look for more of it on Nightly News tonight. So as Richard is talking about sort of this lock and key, right? One thing you may be thinking is, okay, is my lock good enough for my key? In other words, is my vaccine good enough to protect me right now? President Biden says, yeah, but the White House is still working on some backup plans just in case, with Moderna, with Pfizer, with Johnson & Johnson. And today, Moderna's top doctor says if they need to, they'll get started on a vaccine and tweak the formula so that it's specific to the Omicron variant. That could come out early next year. That top doctor is joining us now, Dr. Paul Burton, the Chief Medical Officer at Moderna. Dr. Burton, good evening. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you, Hallie.
So let me start here. Right now, based on the data, what little there is that you've seen, does your vaccine protect sufficiently right now against Omicron?
So, Hallie, that's the important question, and we don't know the answer to that yet. We know that it certainly protects very well against Delta, but that experiment, which is critical and has to be done very thoroughly, do we get neutralization of Omicron with our vaccine and indeed with the other ones? We won't know that for a couple of weeks.
Is there data to suggest that you need to reformulate the vaccine, or is that a step that Moderna might take soon, almost as a precautionary measure?
So, Hallie, I think the available vaccines we have today are very effective, and I don't think it is likely that there will be no protection from these vaccines against Omicron, but we may see waning of it. So I think the question could become, will we need to have boosting, which I think is very sensible, at the standard dose or even a higher dose? And then as we begin to see more clinical data coming out of South Africa, as we begin to look at the scientific data coming out from the labs in the next few weeks, if we need to retool the vaccine in some way, we can do it. And indeed, we've been prepared to do that over the summer.
What do those preparations look like?
Well, so we've shown data where we have taken a vaccine that can recognize the original strain and the beta strain, and also testing a beta delta bispecific booster, if you like. So we have those, we've tested those in humans already, and we've published some data from them. I think if we then exhaust that, if we believe that, well, we have to go further, we're already at risk preparing to make a Omicron specific booster as well. And that work has started even last week.
Is it your professional assessment that if, in fact, Moderna, let's say, does move forward with this Omicron specific variant, that we're then in a position where, you know, like practically as a human being, you know, walking around this world, do I then go back and get my new sort of two shots of the vaccine plus a booster? Do I go back for a booster plus? Am I going back every year like we do for the flu shot? What does that really look like for people in their daily lives?
Yeah, so look, as my R&D colleagues are developing the Omicron specific booster now and the other ones, that's a ways down the road. I think there are very important and sensible things, simple things that people can do right now. So you talked about it. Hand washing, we've kind of forgot to do some of that sanitization that was big earlier in the year. Some distancing, some mask wearing, and, you know, all of that as we go into the holidays. The vaccines are effective. The Moderna vaccine is very effective. If you have not been vaccinated now, get vaccinated. If you're on the fence, get vaccinated. If you've been vaccinated, as you said, CDC has now even further recommended getting boosted. And in fact, I saw today the UK has also now removed the limits on boosting. So I think those are the key things, Hallie, that people need to do now. If we're going to need a COVID booster, my professional opinion is that we will need it as a regular thing each winter, as you say, along with flu. Okay.
What is the time? You talked about the Omicron specific vaccine that you guys are working on developing and began doing so already last week. What is the timeline for that to be, you know, ready to go to market if, in fact, that were to need to happen?
Yes. I mean, that's going to take weeks to a couple of months, you know, 2 to 3 months. So we're really looking at something in early 22.
Before I let you go, I just want to talk about the vaccine formula, because as we know, Moderna has been in this patent dispute. Now scientists in Africa are trying to recreate the formula to fight their vaccine shortages. Is Moderna rethinking being willing to share its patent to help the world, you know, fight more proactively against this virus?
Well, Hallie, look, everything we do is with people's health in mind. You know, we're trying to bring the vaccine to as many people as possible. We're providing 110 million doses through COVAX to African nations. And we've said all along that during the pandemic, absolutely, we will not enforce our patents. So, you know, whatever we can do to support, that's our aim.
Okay. Dr. Paul Burton from Moderna, thank you so much for being with us. Chief Medical Officer, we appreciate your time on an important day. I know a lot of questions for you. We hope to have you back. Thanks. In other news this evening, Ghislaine Maxwell finally is getting her first day in court. The big question, was she Jeffrey Epstein's scapegoat or his partner in crime? That's what the prosecution and defense are laying out in their opening statements that actually just happened late this afternoon. We've even seen, as we were coming on the air, the first witness take the stand here. Just to remind you, Maxwell faces 6 criminal counts tied to a massive sex trafficking conspiracy. The prosecution says she'd find young girls and, quote, serve them up to Epstein. Her lawyer says that with Epstein dead, she's taken the fall for what they couldn't get out of him. So the stakes incredibly high, right? Because this might be the last chance for Epstein's victims to see somebody convicted for these alleged crimes. Tom Winter has been in and out of the courtroom. I know, Tom, you've been popping in, popping out, popping in, popping out. I think when you came out, the one-time pilot for Jeffrey Epstein was called to the stand as the first witness. And you say this is potentially pretty significant, right?
I think so, Hallie. And yes, you're right. Larry Visosky, who was his one-time pilot for him, started for him back in 1991, took the stand as the last witness today. He'll still be on the stand tomorrow morning being questioned by Maureen Comey, an assistant United States attorney, the daughter of the former FBI director. He's being asked about his time with Epstein and how the flights worked, and essentially establishing that Ghislaine, Maxwell and Epstein did have a companionship of some sort. He didn't call it romantic. He said they weren't hugging, they weren't kissing, but they clearly had a kind of a familiar dialogue between the two of them. He said they would fly generally every 4 days, and sometimes they get a day's notice. Sometimes they'd get even less notice that they were going to be flying. He said he flew Epstein and Maxwell on a number of occasions between New York and Palm Beach and vice versa, as well as Epstein's ranch in Santa Fe, his apartment in Paris even. So he was just starting to lay out who kind of some of the players are, also establishing what Jeffrey Epstein's house looked like in Florida, testifying that he recognized a number of government exhibits and photographs tied to his home, Hallie.
We've also seen, Tom, what I think is interesting, a look at the defense strategy here. We know that we will almost certainly hear from 4 of Epstein's accusers. And what you saw in the defense opening statement today was almost a preemptive attempt to seek to take some of the emotional impact away from that testimony.
Oh, perfectly put. I mean, the big question was the defense going to go after the credibility of the victims? And that's a question that is clearly answered now, which is yes. They're going after them on a couple of key themes. 1, their memory, that this was a long time ago. 2, that the memory has been manipulated. The idea that over time they've accumulated additional facts and information that's come out in various press reports and other court proceedings that's kind of guided them. And the third thing they say is money, that they've all obtained civil attorneys, that they all received in cumulatively millions of dollars in settlements, and so that there was a financial motive for them. So yeah, they're definitely going after the victims here.
Was there a moment in court today, Tom, that stood out to you that you haven't talked about on the air yet?
Yeah, a couple of things, but I think the most important thing is how clear each side was focused on their mission. The opening statement given by Laura Pomerantz, Assistant United States Attorney, almost dispassionate at times, but just laying out what one of these girls went through, according to her and her allegations, this pseudonym of this name Jane, who was 14 years old. And then I think for the defense, I think Bobby Sternheim was very clear. This is not the Jeffrey Epstein trial today. And for the next 6 weeks, this is going to be a trial about Ghislaine Maxwell. And does the government, do prosecutors have enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt? So those were 2 kind of key moments today. Definitely a heavy afternoon in court, Hallie.
Sounds like it. Tom Winter, I'm sure I'll be talking again as you are posted up there outside that courthouse in New York. Appreciate it. Breaking tonight, prosecutors are asking the U.S. Supreme Court to review an appeals court ruling that overturned Bill Cosby's 28th sexual assault conviction. This is just coming into us in the last couple hours. Why? Well, because of what the DA calls a dangerous precedent that could set for immunity agreements. Cosby, remember, served less than 3 years of a 3 to 10-year sentence. And then this is one of the shots of him. He was released from prison at the end of June. I want to bring in now Pete Williams. Okay, Pete, let's break this down for a second. What is the argument here that the Montgomery County District Attorney is trying to make?
So remember what happened in the case. A woman complained that Cosby drugged and sexually attacked her. But the prosecutor at the time said, you know, I just don't think there's enough evidence. We're not going to prosecute this case. Then Cosby was sued in a civil lawsuit and in his deposition incriminated himself. But he relied on the press release from the previous prosecutor promising never to prosecute him, so he thought he was in the clear.
It was found there was a reasonable expectation, right,
That's right,
that Cosby could assume he wasn't going to get prosecuted.
And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that for that reason his prosecution had to, he was subsequently prosecuted again. That evidence in the civil case was used against him, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, tossed out the conviction, said no, he relied on that press release. So what the new prosecutors are now saying is that that doesn't make any sense. That was not a reliable thing. The court got it wrong. Please fix it, Supreme Court. You shouldn't be able to rely on a press release to think that you're immune. There was no court finding of immunity. There was no agreement among the lawyers. So that this, they say, is a wrong decision that could cause lots of, prosecutions to collapse and other people could depend on it.
Okay, so it's an interesting argument, but is it one that the Supreme Court has any chance in the world of taking up here?
Any chance in the world?
Well,
yes.
I was too broad in that, Peter.
Yeah,
I knew you were going to.
But probably not much. This is a real long shot.
But explain that.
Yeah, well, here's the reason. Number one, you don't have any right in almost every case to appeal to the Supreme Court. You have to ask. So the Supreme Court decides which cases to take. Secondly, they only generally take cases in which they view their job as harmonizing the law among the federal circuits. There's no circuit split here. This is a case that the prosecutor says straight out, this is a case of first impression. This has never happened before. The third thing is they say, you got to fix this because it's just prosecutions are going to fall apart. Well, there's nothing in the brief that says prosecutions are falling apart because of this Pennsylvania ruling. So for all those reasons, the Supreme Court just doesn't often take cases when someone says the lower court got it wrong unless there is some huge constitutional or federal statutory issue at stake, and it's just none of those things are at present here.
Is there anything working in the DA's favor here, in the prosecution's favor, to get the Supreme Court to take them up? You just laid out 3 reasons why they probably wouldn't. Is there anything that tips the scales at least a little bit the other way?
Not that I can see, no. I think, give them credit for giving it the old college try here, but I think the odds the court are going to take it are very remote.
Pete Williams, our justice correspondent. Thank you, Pete, for being on set with us here tonight. Always appreciate it. Coming up on the show, maybe you saw it in a tweet, right? The Twitter CEO, Jack Dorsey, stepping down from the huge company he founded. So why should we care? Will our lives be changing in a meaningful way? We've got some answers coming up. We are seeing for the first time today video of former Governor Andrew Cuomo's testimony from the sexual harassment investigation that led to his resignation. This is an interview by the New York Attorney General's office, and it went on for hours and hours, where Cuomo was questioned about the accusations against him. Here's one of his responses to a picture of him kissing a woman at a wedding. Watch.
You remember asking her, saying to her, "May I kiss you?"
I don't remember saying that, but that is something that I have done recently, as I told you.
Cuomo, if you remember, denied the accusations against him repeatedly and then resigned a week after the New York AG's office found he sexually harassed at least 11 women. Rahema Ellis is covering all of this. I know, Rahema, you've been watching these videos. We've known what Cuomo has said through these transcripts that came out already, but this is the first time we're seeing him being questioned on camera. And in some instances, I mean, listen, I think it is objectively fair to say he comes off a little bit testy.
I think that's fair assessment of how this will play not only to you and me, but to people who will see it. And the governor might not even object to it, that he is a little contentious when he's being asked these questions by the independent investigator. And what you will see is some of his responses may have been one of the reasons why, after 11 hours and a number of different interviews with some of the alleged victims in this case, or those who have accused the governor of sexual harassment, why the independent investigator came up with the finding that the governor was sexually harassing people in the office place. So one of the things that he is asked, check out this exchange. He's asked for the definition of what is a girlfriend. It seemed like it might be a simple response, but not so simple from the governor. Take a listen.
Do you understand what a girlfriend is?
Oh, girlfriend means different things to different people.
Okay, what does it mean?
What a girlfriend means to me may be different than what a girlfriend means to you.
What does it mean to you?
It doesn't matter what it means to me. It matters what you want to know.
I'd like to know whether you thought she was a girlfriend of yours. Do you not understand? What is your understanding of the word girlfriend?
My understanding doesn't matter.
It
a friend
does,
who is
so with all respect.
It is a friend who is a girl.
There's another exchange that I want to share with you and with our viewers and listeners, that the governor was asked about his behavior in the office place. And this one in particular involving a kiss of a staff member. Listen to this exchange.
Have you kissed any staff member on the lips?
I kiss on the cheek. There may be an occasion where a staff member kissed me on the lips, but I kiss on the cheek as a rule.
The governor said that it is his understanding that a peck on the cheek, almost in the European style of greeting of someone or saying goodbye to someone, that there is the familiar kind of kiss. But he said, he continued on in that to say that it was never anything romantic at all involved in this.
I can only assume that we've already heard, Rahema, from sort of the Cuomo camp, right, as a response to this?
Yeah, they have issued a response. I'd like to read it as we put it up full screen. And it says, to the surprise of no one, Tish, meaning Letitia James, who is the state attorney general, continues abusing her government power to leverage her political future. Today's manipulated release of hand-picked witness testimony with selective redactions is typical. She even edited the governor's video testimony. It is also no coincidence that she decided to release select transcripts minutes before one of her rivals declared for governor. And that's coming from a spokesman for Andrew Cuomo. And you know that Letitia James has also declared that she is a candidate for governor.
Rahima Ellis covering the ins and outs of this one. Rahima, thank you very much for being with us.
For sure.
Coming up, it might be the end of the year. We might all be starting to wind down, but Congress is definitely not, with a ton on the agenda. So that's our backstory with Leanne Caldwell explaining how she covers it all. That's coming up. So we mentioned Twitter has a new CEO. We'll talk about how it might change the way you use that platform if you use it on a day-to-day basis. But first, let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Waukesha Christmas parade suspect Daryl Brooks now faces 6 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. Remember, it was 5 just last week. Prosecutors filed that additional charge today after the death of a little 8-year-old boy, Jackson Sparks. He died last Tuesday. We told you about that here on the show. He was the youngest person killed during that horrific attack. Number 2, Elizabeth Holmes telling her side of the story during day 4 of testimony in her federal fraud trial. She's trying to defend herself against accusations she misled investors on her company, Theranos' abilities. She's pled not guilty. And today she really tried to distance herself from the company's lab operations. She says she was not involved in the day-to-day. Number 3, New Zealand Parliament member Julie Ann Genter got on her bike early Sunday morning right here, not for a leisurely ride, but for this little nugget to have a baby. That's right, she was already in labor when she hopped on the bike. She is real pregnant in that picture, but she made the 10-minute ride to the hospital, didn't have time to hop in the car, gave birth only about an hour later to a healthy baby girl. Congratulations to her. Number 4. The golfing community is saying goodbye to a legend. Lee Elder, who became the first black man to play in the Masters, died yesterday at the age of 87. He was actually honored at this year's Masters back in April during the tournament's opening ceremony. Number 5, there is so much hype for Spider-Man No Way Home that the release of pre-sale tickets crashed a bunch of theater websites like AMC and Fandango overnight. Spider-Man hits theaters in less than 3 weeks. Many of the sites are back up and running again, so if you feel like getting tickets, I guess you have a clear path to do that if you so desire. You might have seen some of this news on Twitter. That's where I think a lot of folks do get those headlines here and there, and there's some big news on that front. The founder of Twitter stepping down. And when that happened, it was such big news that trading of Twitter stock was suspended for a little bit while Wall Street absorbed the whole thing. Dorsey is going to be replaced by the company's chief technology officer, but he's going to stay on the board until his term expires in 2022. Kate Rooney is here to talk about this. Hey, Kate, good evening to you.
Hi, Hallie. Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Hey, back at you. Listen, this is a big deal, but can you, and I'm going to ask this in a blunt way, and I mean this like in a well-meaning way, why should we care, right? Like if I use Twitter, or even if I don't, why does this matter to my life?
Yeah, of course. Well, it's a huge shakeup in Silicon Valley, and at first the average user might not notice much right away. Twitter right now, though, is still very much the center of politics, media, free speech, so it's an important time for the tech company and for users eventually. We'll start to see some of these effects, but part of Dorsey stepping down was a lot of pressure from activist investors and from shareholders, so they really wanted Twitter to grow more aggressively, increase the company's reach and value, and the new CEO has the task here of growing what they call the monetizable daily active users by 50%.
What in English does that mean? What is that?
Exactly. The user base, the people that are on Twitter that they can actually make money from. So the big thing that users will likely see are things like subscriptions and other ways of monetizing you as a user. So the content on Twitter, while it might be interesting, they just haven't done the greatest job of making money off of that. So that's really what the new CEO is here to do.
Does this change at all? Listen, you know as well as I do that Twitter has really come under fire for how it handles misinformation and disinformation. Does this change signal like the potential for meaningful change on that front? Or is that overreading what this is all about, given that the new CEO is somebody who is still an executive over the last, X number of years anyway?
Right. So still the same long-term vision. They're really still dealing with a lot of the things that they've had to deal with for the last couple of years, including hate speech. The one thing that may change here are some of the technologies that they use to weed out hate speech and other types of abuses. So the incoming CEO, he's an expert in artificial intelligence. He was the head of a project at Twitter called Blue Sky. So this was a research project to really use other technologies and aim to sort of collaborate with other social media companies and find ways to really figure out how these posts are promoted, how users can actually get more control over the content that they see. So one of the things, I mean, he uses things like AI, you might see more machine learning, but things that the average user, again, probably won't interact with or know that they're interacting with when they do use it.
And listen, still no edit button, much to the chagrin of some. What's interesting, Kate, and I wonder if you read into this too, you know, they picked somebody from the tech, that was running the tech side of things, not somebody on like the media or comms side, the way that maybe another social media platform, Meta comes to mind, for example, might have done.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, he is very much a technologist, and I've been talking to sources more on the Square side, but sort of why Jack Dorsey picked the chief technology officer. I'm told he really is a product guy. He knows the product better than anybody, and he's very smart. He's also very humble. So Jack Dorsey really puts a lot of he really appreciates the fact that this guy's humble, that he's got a lot of humility, and I think he really just thinks he's a smart guy. So that's one of the things that I've been hearing. And the other thing I was hearing from sources on Jack Dorsey and why this is happening now is that really, I mean, he's had to do things you guys have covered at NBC. He has been in front of Congress multiple times. He's had to deal with a lot of the drama here. I'm told it just wasn't fun for him anymore. He runs another multi-billion-dollar, $108 billion company, Square. It's a payments company. That really is where he sort of spends most of his time and effort. And Bitcoin is another wild card there, but he is very much a Bitcoin believer, has been a huge bull there. If you look at his own Twitter profile, it says #Bitcoin. He's really thought is spending more time on global payments and cryptocurrencies than either of the companies that he's running right now.
It feels like a macrocosm of the lessons so many people learned in the pandemic, which is if you're not enjoying it, like go do something else. So maybe that's what
exactly.
it is too. Kate, it's so good to have you on. Thank you for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Time
Hallie.
now to get over to the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. And tonight, we're taking a closer look at everything going down, and I do mean everything going down on Capitol Hill, where at least for this coming month, the news is not going to stop. If you're a journalist on the Hill, you are looking at an extremely busy end of the year. Why? Because Congress has a lot of things left on its plate, and they're running out of time to do them. They still have to vote to prevent a government shutdown by Friday, raise the debt ceiling again by December 15th, try to pass that $1.7 trillion Build Back Better Act in the Senate. Chuck Schumer wants that done by Christmas, and pass a huge defense spending bill before the first of the new year. And if that wasn't enough, Congressman Adam Schiff says the House January 6th Select Committee looking into the riot at the Capitol will probably decide this week whether to refer President Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, for criminal contempt charges after he refused to testify in front of Congress. They have a vote actually Wednesday for a different former DOJ official. Did you get all that? Leanne Caldwell did. One of our Capitol Hill correspondents who's on top of all of it. Leanne, you know, in the backstory, we like to talk about how a story comes together. This is all coming to a head, as it often does, as Congress puts in place these self-imposed deadlines at the end of the year. Can you talk about what your strategy is for tackling, you know, covering such a long to-do list when it comes to folks on the Hill?
We always brace, Hallie, for the end of the year. Congress waits until the end of the year. Usually the holidays are ruined, especially in the last 10 years. As far as the strategy is concerned, drink a lot of water and be in touch with as many people as possible. We have, of course, there's 535 members. That means 535 available sources to us, plus their aides. And you really have to be in communication with so many people while also staying on top of what other people are reporting to make sure you're not missing anything. So it is extremely busy. It's exhausting, but we are always working on adrenaline.
One of the things that's interesting about this, too, Leanne, is that, you know, you and I, you know, we both know this. You have to triangulate what your sources are telling you, right? Because you could hear one thing from one source and something else from another source, and they're both trying to spin you, perhaps on the same topic on which you want to hear. So there's a lot of, you know, always double and triple checking, but especially when it comes to reporting on Congress, a lot of like, what are the sources' motivations, right?
Absolutely. People have agendas. They want to get their agenda out. And that's why here at NBC, we actually have very stringent source approval guidelines where you have to have 2, sometimes 3 sources. But it's also up to us as reporters to be able to see through the spin and not report something just because someone tells it to us. We have to report something that we think is actually true and factual and relevant to the story. So there's a lot of conversations. You can't just talk to one person. You have to talk to a lot of people to get the full story, Hallie.
And in some ways, I wonder, Leanne, if as a journalist watching this and covering Congress, this moment where, we showed that calendar graphic where all the blocks are filled in, like a bingo, if this moment also felt inevitable, because we've been through this cycle, Leanne, it, I know it, where there's deadlines, they kick the can, there's deadlines, they kick the can. That's just kind of how Congress has been functioning over the last few years.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Last Christmas, I was here up until Christmas Eve and then back again the day after Christmas because they were trying to get their work done and fund the government. This was the end of a presidential term, the beginning of a new Congress. And this is what Congress does. They are in more often than not around the holidays. Meanwhile, they're still busy the rest of the year as well with politics and their agenda and what they're trying to do. And so we just have to gear up. And we also have to know when you can take time off, because that's also really tricky too. And sometimes just stepping away. We have a great team here, Hallie, and sometimes other people can fill your shoes.
No, I mean, that's true. I know you have a great team, particularly your Senate producer, Leanne. Thank you so much. Yeah. I appreciate you being with us, my friend. Thank you. We got a lot more coming up here on the show, including firefighters still trying to put out a major fire in North Carolina that's burned hundreds of acres already at one state park, and crews on the ground say this thing is far from over. We'll talk more about it. Plus, Matthew McConaughey not running for governor of Texas. Why he has decided not to do it. We told you last week he might have, and what it means for other folks actually in the race. Do you love Matthew McConaughey? Do you want to be Matthew McConaughey? Do you want to be with Matthew McConaughey? Well, it's not going to happen if you want him to be the next governor of Texas. He now is saying he is not going to run, even though, as we just told you about last week, he's actually polling ahead of some of the actual candidates in the race. All right, so what happens next? Noted Matthew McConaughey fan Steve Kornacki is standing by for us at the big board. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out east from the Northeast Bureau, fire crews in North Carolina are fighting a huge wildfire for day 3. It's spreading through Pilot Mountain State Park in the northern part of the state. So far, it's burned more than 300 acres, but officials think it's going to burn something like 900 acres by the time it's all over. From our Midwest Bureau, a high school basketball team in Michigan really lucked out after a wrong number in a group text ended up nabbing them a call with Tampa Bay Buccaneers cornerback Sean Murphy, who then got Rob Gronkowski, Tom Brady, other players on FaceTime. Quarterback Brady said it was fun getting the young kids hyped up. Imagine that, one wrong number, and all of a sudden you're talking with the Bucs. And then from our New York Bureau, a Broadway tribute to the late Stephen Sondheim yesterday in Times Square. Sondheim was the musical mind behind favorites like West Side Story and Sweeney Todd. He died Friday, as we told you then, at 91 years old. Stars like Lin-Manuel Miranda and others all came out to remember the theater legend. You can see that scene from Times Square there. Really touching, very emotional for Sondheim fans. The will he or won't he has been answered now. Matthew McConaughey won't be running for governor of Texas. He put the rumors of his potential run to rest overnight. Check out this video.
It never occurred to me that I would one day be considered for political leadership. It's a humbling and inspiring path to ponder. It is also a path that I'm choosing not to take at this moment.
The Oscar-winning actor says he's going to be in service in other ways. But let's not forget the national attention his potential run generated. That was real. And according to polls, he would have been a popular candidate, even though nobody actually knew whether he'd run as a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. So now that Texas governor's race pushes forward, minus one celebrity candidate, but with a lot on the table. Steve Kornacki is here to break this all down. Steve, we'll talk in a minute about your favorite Matthew McConaughey movie, and I'll ask you to quote from it. But let me start with, the fact that he was a popular candidate, right? The fact that he is a celebrity, he did poll well, and what that says about the state of the race in Texas.
Yeah, I'm going to try to come up with the title there while I'm going through this, see if I can do a little bit of multitasking here. But okay, as you mentioned, McConaughey not running. we didn't know much about his politics. We still don't know much about them. But I think this is an interesting measure of that celebrity you're talking about here, that just basic personal popularity he has. Here you go. They put Greg Abbott, the Republican incumbent governor, Beto O'Rourke, a Democrat who wants to run against Abbott, and they threw in McConaughey in this poll, a Dallas Morning News poll. This is just from the last week or two. They put him in as an independent candidate. And look, he was already running in second place. In fact, he was running a bit ahead of Beto O'Rourke, who wants to be the Democratic nominee here. And when you dug into these numbers a little bit here, I think you found broad popularity for McConaughey. It extended into both parties. One question was also asked in this poll, hey, would you rather see McConaughey or would you rather see O'Rourke running against Abbott? More people just wanted to see McConaughey run than said they wanted to see O'Rourke run. So certainly he loomed here as a major presence if he got in this race. Lots of question marks, but a major presence, and also clearly an obstacle to Beto O'Rourke in trying to unseat Greg Abbott. And if you take this to the next step, if you take McConaughey out, because in this poll they did, here's what the two-way looks like. You take McConaughey out, you make it O'Rourke versus Abbott, and now you got it at a 6-point spread between them. So that's what that seems to be what O'Rourke is looking at here in terms of his path. He starts out running behind. He has the major wild card removed. And I can just show you 3 things to keep an eye on, though, Hallie. Abbott's job approval in Texas in this poll is not a great number for an incumbent governor, but it's not a terrible number. Abbott is not very, very unpopular in Texas. 49 approve, 41 disapprove. That number probably has to come down a little bit, or that disapprove has to go up for O'Rourke to have a real shot here. Also, the midterm climate in 2022, especially in a state like Texas, right now at least, is looking like it's going to be very negative for Democrats. Biden's approval in Texas, 42%. That could create headwinds for Beto O'Rourke to be running into. And then finally, there's voters' own view of O'Rourke. Remember, he ran for the Senate in Texas in 2018. Then ran for the presidency. He staked out a much more sort of liberal, outspoken sort of a style in that presidential run, more unfavorable than favorable now back in Texas. So he's got some hurdles of his own.
Steve Kornacki, that is an excellent big board breakdown, as always. And because I said I would ask you, now I have to, just to name just like your number one favorite Matthew. I know you have a million favorite McConaughey movies, but like if you had to pick just one.
I don't want to get it. Was he in Operation Dumbo Drop?
I'm going to have my research team check on that because I actually have no idea.
I got my fingers crossed. I hope I got one.
Of all the movie titles, Steve Kornacki, you're the best. Thank you. I appreciate you. Thanks for being on, my friend. Talk soon. Tennis star Novak Djokovic probably is not going to be in the court at the Australian Open. Why not? Vaccine mandates. And his dad went as far as to call the restrictions blackmail. So is the #1 ranked tennis player really going to sit this thing out? We'll get into it. COVID vaccine mandates have been called a lot of things, but blackmail may be a new one. This is what Novak Djokovic's dad is calling the Australian Open's stance on players getting vaccinated. Now, the Open doesn't start for another, month and a half, January 17th. But Djokovic might miss it because he doesn't want to say whether he's actually been vaccinated. Thing is, we haven't heard from Djokovic himself. The tournament's director confirmed the vaccine mandate for players over the weekend. Sam Brock is here to talk about this. And Sam, this is one that is getting a ton of people's attention because Djokovic is so, hang on, I'm looking at this camera over here. Djokovic is the world's #1 tennis player, right? Huge star. He's now involved in this COVID vaccine controversy. The stakes are high here.
Stakes are definitely high. I mean, what would it mean, Hallie, if we didn't know what LeBron James' vaccination status was for months? That played out. And I'm not saying that Novak Djokovic is LeBron James, but he's the preeminent player in men's tennis. He's also on the precipice of a really hallowed record. He would reach 21 Grand Slam titles if he were to win the Australian Open. As you hear the planes fly above me, 21 would pass Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal. Those guys are a little bit older than he is. If he were to win, it's a huge deal. 9 Australian Open titles to begin with, and yet it is not clear if Djokovic will play. But it's also worth noting, Hallie, that it's his dad saying this, not the player himself.
So this is like, why his dad, Sam? I don't, for people who don't know, like the relationship between the two of them, like why is his father speaking for him?
Honestly, probably because he's a buffer in this case, Hallie. You know, this is a very sensitive topic.
Yeah.
Novak Djokovic is one of several players who has declined to comment on their status. The #2 and 3 men's ranked players in the world, Medvedev and Tsitsipas, both of them haven't commented either. Now, we do know this. Rafael Nadal will be playing in Australia. Roger Federer is out with an injury, so there's a possible opening here for Djokovic. But the ATP has been very, very clear about this. If you are unvaccinated and you continue to keep that status, life is going to be a lot harder. More testing, you might have to pay for the testing. You could lose out on prize money if you're forced to withdraw from some of these tournaments.
But they could still play? I mean, they could still get tested? That's an okay substitute?
So, depends on your definition of okay. There was some speculation that you could have a 14-day quarantine for some of these players and then get involved. But the reality is the spectators have to get tested, not just tested, the spectators have to be vaccinated. The employees have to be vaccinated. Why would the players be held to a different standard than everybody else? And it looks like the sea change is about to happen in men's tennis, especially when you have other sports like the NBA and the NFL that are above 90% of their players vaccinated. But this is not a team sport. This is an individual sport unless you're playing doubles. So there's fewer ramifications for your teammates, but it's still really, really important.
You hit on a point that I think is so salient here, Sam, which is, right, unlike the NBA, unlike the NFL. Listen, you and I were just talking about the NFL a couple of weeks ago. Tennis is a solo sport, specifically for what we're talking about, like you said, unless it's doubles. The only potential harm, it seems, is not to your teammates necessarily. It's like to yourself for not being able to go after, let's say, another record or another personal record.
It is, but also at a time when Australia, the host country here, has had 6 stay-at-home orders in 18 months. You would like to think that everybody is on the same page. That's probably what this is about as well in terms of the messaging.
That's a good point. Sam Brock, live for us, I think outside a tennis court in beautiful Miami. Sam, we're glad to have you on. Thank you for being on the show. Appreciate it. That does it for this hour. More Hallie Jackson now here for you tomorrow. Same time, same place. We'll see you then.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.